Okay, I'm going to get started. Thank you all very much for joining this talk. I'm going to be talking about our research on American Kestrels. We're going to be looking at territory size and habitat use of these birds in Northern Virginia. Let's see here, come on. To outline the talk, first I'll give an introduction to the Clifton Institute and the work that we do here. Then I'll talk about the American Kestrel, introduce this cool species we've been working on, then get into our methods, and finally present some preliminary results from our field season last year. So the Clifton Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit. We're located north of Warrenton, Virginia on a 900-acre property. We have 6 full-time staff. We're funded by individual donations and foundations. And our 3 program areas are education, restoration, and research. Our mission is to inspire a deeper understanding and appreciation of nature, to study the ecology of our region, to restore habitat, and to conserve native biodiversity. Like I said, we're located near Warrenton, Virginia, and Fauquier County, about an hour west of Washington, D.C. Let me admit another waiting room. Okay. We have a 900-acre property here at Clifton, which is inhabited by many kestrels and lots of other cool species, like this rainbow dung beetle. We're using iNaturalist to catalog all the species found at Clifton, and you can check it out at cliftoninstitute.org/iNaturalist. And this wonderful property is protected under a conservation easement, like I said, so it'll be here forever, hopefully hosting a lot of amazing species for a long time to come. So like I said, we do environmental education. That's about half of our programs. We do field trips to local schools, summer camps, and natural history and conservation programs for adults as well as kids. We're also working hard to restore the native plants and animals at the Clifton Institute with the goal of helping declining species. We also advise landowners on how to manage their land to help native plants and animals. And we've started in the last few years a native plant propagation program where we collect seeds locally and use those plants in restoration projects. So I'm going to be talking about kestrels tonight, but we also have other research programs that we're working on, such as native grasslands in the area and how to restore them. This summer, we're going to be doing surveys on some greenstone woodlands on the Clifton Institute property.
Click on mute it.
Sounds like they're figuring out how to mute that. We're also going to be starting a multi-year project on box turtles, trying to understand how they are surviving in our landscape and how they're affected by mowing and bush hogging. And really the key point here is that the research that we do at the Clifton Institute, it all feeds back into our education program. So I think that's one aspect that we are in a way that we are unusual, that we're doing primary research on the property and using that to inform our education programs. Okay, so that's it for the brief intro to Clifton. Now on to the kestrel. So American kestrels are small falcons that have 22-inch wingspans. They're found in open habitats in our area, especially big open fields. They eat mainly insects, especially grasshoppers, and small rodents and various other things, every now and then a bluebird or a skink. And this picture shows one on a telephone wire. This is how I first got interested in kestrels when I was a kid, is driving down the road, seeing them on wires, waiting to catch prey. So that's one way that a lot of people notice these birds. So for their life history, kestrels nest in natural cavities or in nest boxes like the one shown here. They usually have a clutch size of 5. And here you can see 4 kestrel eggs and 1 starling egg. So that's maybe the first thing to learn tonight. If you have a kestrel box and you see something that looks like a robin egg, but it's a bit bigger than a robin egg, that's a starling egg, and that should be tossed right out the window. Incubation lasts about a month, as does nesting. The nestling period lasts about an additional month. And then once the babies leave the box, they're dependent on the adults for around 2 weeks. The lifespan of kestrels, there's limited information available about this, but it seems like they live about 3 years in the wild with a record of 11 years.
Doug Larson.
So if you all could please mute your microphones, a few people we're still hearing you there. Thanks a lot. So if you look at the global range of the American kestrel, you can see it's found all the way from Alaska down to Tierra del Fuego. It has a huge range, and it's fairly common across a lot of that range. But so it's secure globally. It's not about to go extinct globally. But we are seeing some pretty alarming declines in parts of its range, for example, in the northeastern US. And so we're worried about this bird because we think it could be a canary in the coal mine for grassland birds and farmland birds. Still have a few waiting room here, sorry. And for example, in North America, the fastest declining group of birds across the continent is grassland birds, and farmland birds in Europe are also faring really poorly. So we need to figure out what's causing the declines and birds that used to be common, like kestrels.
It's right in the middle.
Now, if we zoom into the range of, zoom into abundance data for the Mid-Atlantic, you can see on the bottom right here is the legend showing the frequency of occurrence. So dark purple are areas where eBird checklists that are submitted, about 40% or more of checklists include records of kestrels.
It's right here. So it's right in the middle with the little fuzzy. Yeah.
You could please mute your mic. I'm trying to see who.
This one right here. Yeah. And then there's this. So yes. So
How do I mute my
if
mic?
anybody's really good at Zoom, maybe they could. Oh wait, I think.
Hold on.
Now he's a long person with yeah.
Please mute your microphone.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to this map of the Mid-Atlantic, we're looking at eBird data, and looking during the breeding season, we can see that basically in the northeastern US, kestrels are pretty abundant, in the southeast, not so much. This is from May to June. Then if you look at the same area in January and February, you can see there's a marked shift in kestrels. So we can see in the southeast, they get to be a lot more common in the winter. And so I'll toggle back and forth a few times. You can see that in Virginia, in Southern Virginia, they are more common actually in the winter. In Northern Virginia, they're pretty common year round, it appears. But there's clearly a shift going on. So there are a lot of birds migrating from the northeast to the southeast. But we have kestrels in Virginia year round, and it's not really clear if our birds are northeastern birds that are just passing through, or if we have permanent, or if they're all permanent residents. Another way to look at the data are bar charts in eBird. And for example, this is a northern parula. You can see that they are basically gone in the winter. They're very rare in the winter. They appear in the spring. They're breeding here in moderate numbers. Then they migrate back through in the fall, again in high numbers, and then they're gone in the winter. And now if we look at that same graph for kestrels across Virginia, we see actually that it's pretty flat, but there is an increase in September and October during fall migration. And there's also a bit of an increase in December and January, which is kind of interesting. Then if we zoom in just to the 15 counties in Northern Virginia, it's remarkably flat. There's a tiny bump in September, but otherwise kestrels seem to be about equally abundant year round. So this is kind of interesting. Another way we can look at this is by looking at band recapture data. So that's when researchers like us catch these birds and put bands on their legs, and then when they're recaptured, you can figure out where they came from and how old they are and so forth. The problem is that recapture rates are really low. This one paper cited a recapture rate as high as 10%, and that's unusually high. So it's usually in the low single digits for recapture rates. So it's pretty hard to figure out from this as well. But luckily the Moreaus, Lance and Jill Moreau, and the Shenandoah Valley nearby have done quite a lot of banding, and their data indicates that the kestrels in our area are actually mostly resident. So they found that 4% of the kestrels that were banded in their area in the breeding season were recaptured in that same area in the winter, while only 0.2% of the birds that they have banded have ever been recaptured outside of their study area. So like I said, kestrels are declining in our area. You can look at this from a number of data sets. One is the North American Breeding Bird Survey. So on this graph on the y-axis is the number of kestrels observed per route, and on the x-axis is year. This is a citizen science survey, a roadside survey, and you can see there's a pretty clear gradual decline from 1960 to the present. Another citizen science data set is the Christmas bird count, and you can see a similar trend from 2000 to 2020 in Christmas count data from Maryland. So there clearly is a gradual decline in our area. Please mute your microphones. There are a number of hypotheses for this decline, although no one is really sure why kestrels are declining. So for example, loss of agricultural land due to urbanization is a good hypothesis. Clean farming, that is cleaning up hedgerows and planting crops right up to the roadside without leaving much in terms of hedgerows or perches. That reduces prey and also perches for raptors. Using lots of insecticides and rodenticides are surely not good, although we still don't have really good data on that. Hawk Mountain has started collecting information on this, and we're going to participate this summer with that as well. These chemicals could kill prey and potentially bioaccumulate in the kestrels themselves. Predation by Cooper's hawks could be another issue. They have increased over the last few years, and they like to eat kestrels. Although there's been a little bit of work on this, and it indicates that maybe Cooper's hawks are not the main issue, but we still don't know for sure. Competition with starlings for nest sites is also a potential problem. And low fledgling survival is another potential problem, and we're going to be looking at that this year together with Hawk Mountain to see if we can figure out what the fate is of fledglings. So basically, we have a lot of hypotheses without any real clear answers, and the work we're doing here with our collaborators is trying to learn a bit more about the causes of the decline in kestrels. So this is a study on habitat. And like I said, there are lots of different potential causes of decline, but we're most interested in habitat changes. And one of the influential people for me in this endeavor was Roger Jones, and he had banded kestrels for decades, and he had seen declines in kestrels on his land and on his brother's property, which is pictured here. And he was pretty sure that it was because the fields were getting too tall and the vegetation was too tall for them to forage in. And they had even started widening the trails on Bruce Jones's property to try to allow them to hunt more effectively. So I thought this was a really interesting idea, and we needed to get some data to see if it was really holding out across the region. And in addition, I talked to Joe Kolowski, our main collaborator on this project, to see if we could find out if there were more voles in different habitats. So fields that were taller, if they had more or less food, or if it was just the ability of kestrels to access that food. And we're going to finally be looking at, we're finally going to be quantifying some prey abundance in these different habitats in 2023. So it's a long-term project. So but what do we know about the habitat of kestrels? Well, like I said, we know they prefer big open fields that are relatively far from forests. They seem, at least one study showed that they really prefer fields that are 10 inches tall or shorter. Another study found that they require large patches of suitable habitat. So that's 3,000 acres or more of grasslands or agricultural land. That's a big chunk. And I'm interested to see exactly how that relates to our study area. But really, this is all that's been done, and the detailed habitat requirements and movements of kestrels among different kinds of fields is unknown. So in this study, we are most interested in comparing the 4 major field types and how they are used by kestrels in our area. So we are comparing cattle pastures, hay fields, row crop fields, and wildflower meadows / natural grasslands. And we are most interested in these 4 because these are the major 4 habitat types across the mid-Atlantic, and they all 4 occur in our area. So we were able to tag kestrels that had access to at least 2 of these habitat types to get at some of these questions.
So there we are.
Please mute your mic, Jocelyn.
Yeah, let me just find some. Am I muted? Why should I be needed?
So, but
Right.
what do we know about territory size so far?
Mm.
Quite a few studies have been done on kestrel territory size, mainly from radio tags, and they have found a huge range of variation from 60 to 1,000 acres, roughly, and found that
I'll be
the territories
darned.
average about 393
Let's hope
acres.
it's something simple.
Um,
Is our volume button on this?
let me see if I can mute.
Volume.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Here,
yeah,
right there.
it shouldn't be that though.
And hold on. I'm going to do this. Escape.
Mhm.
Go to this volume.
Thank you all for bearing with us
Not
on the technology. We wanted to do this program in person, but
Oh,
just couldn't make it happen with COVID, and now we've got
I was just
a couple
moving that
inches of
because it
snow.
would be too
Mhm.
loud.
you turned the video on. You want to keep it on or you want to turn it off for right now? Because you want to turn it off while we're trying to
Okay, yeah.
and mute us.
Okay, I think we're back. So like I
My
say, there's
audio,
quite a few
don't
studies have
mute
been
it.
done on territory size in kestrels and found pretty big territories.
Sorry.
We're especially interested in this
Yes.
because the size of the territory may indicate the quality
you
of the
see it?
habitat. So if a kestrel can make its living in a small area, then why would it need to go expose itself to more predators and spend more energy going to larger areas? So we're really interested in the size of the territories and especially what kinds of habitats are found underneath them. And there have been several studies, but the tracking has not been very good because GPS transmitters until very recently have not been light enough to tag kestrels. So our research questions. First, we wanted to know how big are kestrel territories in Northern Virginia? As I alluded to before, how is territory size related to the availability of different field types and the progression of the breeding season? Which of the 4 major open habitats in the mid-Atlantic are preferred by kestrels? How are vegetation height and density related to habitat use? And how does habitat use change as fields grow taller or when fields are mowed or harvested? So we have a whole bunch of research questions here, and it's going to take us about 3 years probably to get answers to all of these. But the purpose of this talk is to update you on our progress thus far, and also just to let you know how we're doing this project, especially to those of you who gave us permission to study on your land. Okay, so now on to our methods. First, I should mention that the 2 co-PIs with me on this project are Joe Kolowski and Alan Williams. Joe Kolowski really is leading all aspects of this project with a focus on statistics and writing, but overseeing the entire project. Alan Williams is our resident kestrel bander and hawk enthusiast, who also maintains a huge network of kestrel and barn owl boxes in the area. He's been a huge help in this project. We also had a great team of interns and technicians last summer, Kaylin Wolfer, Sarah Kane, and Megan McDaniels. And JF Darien, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the last name very well, from Hawk Mountain came down and trained us in how to attach back-to-back transmitters to kestrels, which was critical. So how do we catch these birds to tag them? We thought we would try BC traps, which is basically when you put a mouse inside of a wire cage and then put little loops of monofilament fishing line on top and then snare kestrels that way. We were not that effective with using BC traps, and we found that nest boxes were by far the best way of catching them. And in the top right photo, you can see we have a camera on the end of a pole, and in the bottom right picture, you can see a close-up shot of the camera. So what we do is we sneak up on the box and plug the hole with the camera, and then we can see if the female's in there or not, and then she's not gonna be able to get out. Then we go up on the ladder, open up the box, and grab the female. Once we have the female in the hand, we attach these GPS transmitters, which is shown in the top, with a Spectra backpack harness. And we use TechnoSmart Gypsy transmitters from Italy. And these transmitters, we only attached them if they were going to weigh less than 3% of the body weight of the female. And the cool thing about these transmitters is that they're solar powered, so they could theoretically last a really long time. The trick is, making sure that there's enough sun hitting the solar panel, but it's not like they have a specified battery life. So once we attached the transmitters to the Kestrels, we had to go within about 300 yards of the Kestrel to download the location from the transmitter. So because they're so lightweight, they're actually not able to, we're not able to download the data directly from the satellite. So we have to be within a pretty close range to download the data with our portable base station, which Sarah is demonstrating in this picture. So that's probably why you saw us driving around a lot if you're one of the landowners where we were studying these birds. Vegetation sampling, this was the least fun part of this project, especially when it was really hot and there were lots of ticks. But it's really important for us to understand how kestrel habitat use is related to vegetation height and density. We did this by putting out 6 points in each type of in each field type, and they are each spaced by 20 meters apart. And then we had one observer kneeling and the other observer holding a pole, which the heights of which are marked. And we quantified density by seeing how much of the pole was visible, and height by seeing the vegetation height from 4 meters away, so in between the kneeling observer and the pole. Data analysis, I'm not going to get into this in detail, but we use autocorrelated kernel density estimators to estimate the home ranges. And basically, instead of just drawing a minimum convex polygon around each point, the kernel density estimator gives you a confidence interval, 95% confidence interval of where the bird is likely to be found. And I'll show you some of those in just a minute. It's not as complicated as it sounds. And then we're also going to be using a resource selection function in the coming months to identify habitat preferences and calculate how these will change with the season. This will also enable us to account for the location of perches in the analysis, which would really throw off the results if we didn't deal with that carefully. Okay, and now to the results. So last season, we were able to set up around 30 new nest boxes, and most of those ended up being occupied. And we had 77% nest success in our 229 box network. So really high nest success. This actually is pretty similar to the numbers seen nationwide in Kestrel nest box programs. Around 70% are successful and around 50% are occupied. And so that right there, if you're thinking about the causes for decline, if there's such a high success rate out of these nest boxes, then it appears that predation of the nestlings or something is not the critical issue. So it must be further down the line, it seems. So last season, we were able to tag 19 kestrels, all female adults, and all the transmitters worked, which is awesome. So this shows our tracking period. So each of these black lines is an individual kestrel ranging from April to December. And you can see quite a few of these birds we tracked for several months, which is really fantastic. So there are 3 birds that we're pretty sure dispersed or migrated. All 3 of these birds had a high battery level before they disappeared. So we think everything was going fine and then they were just gone, and it was in the fall. So we think they dispersed. Who knows where they went? And if we're really lucky, maybe next year they'll come back and we'll be able to get a treasure trove of data where they spent the whole winter. Then we had 6. Then we have 6 birds that we are still tracking. So we feel really lucky to still be able to get data from these birds for such a long period. And as you'll see in a minute, we've learned a lot of interesting detailed information by being able to track them throughout the breeding season and after the breeding season. And then the remaining 11 birds, we don't know what happened to them. And so, could be a dead battery, could have gotten predated, could have left the area. And again, in the spring, we hope that we might run into a few of these birds. And now to the really exciting stuff, the territory maps. So this figure shows the Clifton Institute property line. And you can see that we have we had 4 tagged birds on the Clifton property. And they all had pretty small territories that hardly overlapped at all. So you can see they're really packed into the pasture. We had a 5th territory here, if you can see my mouse. This symbol indicates a nest box. So we had a 5th territory here, but the female was really small, so we could not attach a transmitter to her. You can also see that we had 2 other territories in the neighborhood where we had tagged birds. And what really jumps out to me is that these territories are small. These are not hundreds of acres, and they are not overlapping. So our territories of all the birds we tagged average just 54 acres. And that's the smallest territory size that has ever been reported for kestrels. So that's pretty interesting. Before we get super excited about that, we have to remember that we only tagged females. And there's some anecdotal evidence and a little bit of published evidence that indicates that males have bigger territories than females. So as long as the permits go through, we're going to be tagging males this year, and we're going to be able to see if that's the case or not. But even regardless of that, it's still the smallest territories that have ever been recorded for the species. And that also tells me that this is pretty good kestrel habitat, probably, if they don't need to range far to find food. Minimal overlap, I mentioned that. And we have a live tool online. If you go to cliftoninstitute.org/research, you can see the American Kestrel GPS tracker site, and you can look on there and get the latest points to see where the 6 birds that we're still tracking, see where they're hanging out. It's pretty cool. Thank you, Joe, for creating that. Okay, and so we broke down our analysis of territory size into 3 periods: the nestling period, the fledgling period, and the post-fledgling period. We thought, when we started this project that we might just get the nestling period. We weren't sure how close they would hang around with the fledglings, or if we get them at all after the end of the fledgling period. But we luckily were able to get a lot of data from all 3 of these periods. The nestling period is defined as between the hatch date and the fledge date. Pretty simple. The fledgling period is defined between the fledge date until the last observation of a fledgling in the territory, or 3 weeks after the fledge date, whichever is sooner. The post-fledgling period is after the fledgling stage until September 15th. So just keep those in mind as you look at the maps that are coming up here. And also these figures that show the period. So the nestling period, if you look on this figure, I'm being obscured a little bit here. There we go. The different colored bars show different individual kestrels that we tagged. And on the x-axis is the territory size. At the top, there's a dark gray bar that shows the average for all the individuals. So you can see it averages at about 50 acres, 54 acres, but there's quite a lot of variation during the nestling period. Next, if you look at the fledgling period, you can see a pretty big increase. So once the babies are out of the nest, we're not sure why yet, but the babies are moving around, covering more ground. The adults are keeping up with them and feeding them. So the territory size increases once the fledglings are out of the box. But then after the fledglings are done and independent, the adults go back to having a smaller territory, which I guess makes sense if they find a good spot that provides enough food for themselves and they don't have to worry about feeding the babies or following around some crazy youngsters, then they have a smaller area. If you look at it overall with all the periods combined, you see that it averages about 75 acres territory. But again, here, you may, think that your kestrels will just need a small field like around the nest box, and that's the important area for you in terms of conservation. But that is very important, but also the neighboring properties are important. Let's see, I've got a bunch of comments in the chat here. Let me just
delicious one.
Before we go ahead, I just want to make sure everything's working okay. Okay. Yeah, so it looks like it's working fine, other than people not muting themselves. We'll try to fix that next time. Okay, now this is the really exciting stuff. So I'm going to show 3 example birds, and show the actual tracking data and show how they move around and how that's related to the different kinds of habitats that are available to them. So on this figure, this is an example of a bird that had its nest box in an overgrazed cattle pasture, and that was paradise for this bird. And so you can see the blue dots, that's post-fledgling, that's after the post-fledgling period. The red dots, which you can barely see, are during the fledgling period, and the green dots are when they're nestling. So that's backwards in time, but you can see that's what these colored dots mean. The big blue pin shows the location of the nest box. And like I said, these are all cattle pastures in this area. So if we look at the territory size for the nestling period, you see it's pretty small, right around the nest box. Then during the fledgling period, it expands as we would expect based on the figures I showed just before. But again, it's all pretty much in cattle pastures, a few hay fields as well, but mostly cattle pastures still in the same area, and a lot of overlap with the nestling range. And then the post-fledging period is pretty much right on top of the other two. So this bird really has been in the same area for months. And, you know, it seems to be finding whatever it needs in this cattle pasture. For the second example, we're looking at a bird that nested in a native grassland. You can see red dots, yellow dots, and green dots. And again, the blue pin showing the nest box. The green dots are during the nestling period, so those are right around the nest box. The red dots are during the fledgling period, and the yellow dots are in a post-fledgling. We call it post-2 because it's actually pretty long after the fledgling period, and it set up a totally new territory and stuck to that area for the yellow dots, the post-fledgling period. So like I said, during the nesting phase, it was in the native meadow near the nest box. During the fledgling period, it expanded quite a lot. And I should have mentioned that. So you can see the red outline here is showing obviously the fledgling territory. And this is the kernel analysis. So that's showing, this is capturing 95% of the points. The red line is capturing 95% of the points. And the two white lines are showing the confidence intervals for that range. And then finally, this bird set up in a horse pasture after the fledgling period. So those are the yellow dots. So this is pretty interesting. So, you know, this is really different from the first example I showed you. This bird moved a whole lot. You know, when it first set up its nest in the native meadow, that area had just been mowed in March. And so it was really short, and we think it was able to forage no problem in the native meadow in the early season. But once that grew tall, this bird hopped over a couple of adjacent territories, which we can't see here, but there are other kestrels that bred in this area, if you can see my mouse. And this bird hopped over those to some cattle pastures where it could forage later in the season. And that was after the native meadow had probably grown too tall for it to forage. And then finally ended up moving to a totally different area after the fledgling period in some horse pastures. So we're going to be analyzing these data in a lot more detail. This is just a first pass, but you can see that a lot of interesting stuff is happening here. It seems that the birds move a lot depending on where the resources are required, and we will be informing you more as we learn more in the coming months and years. The third example here shows what happens when you have row crops as well as pastures involved. So again, the blue pin is showing the nest box. The green dots are showing the nestling period. The red dots are showing the fledgling period, and the blue dots are showing the post-fledgling period. So these are all cornfields surrounding the nest box, and you can see the nesting territory was right around the nest box in these cornfields. Again, this was in April and early May when these cornfields were really short. Actually, the northern one was just a cover crop, and the southern one was pretty much bare ground. And so the kestrels were foraging just fine in this very short habitat. But once the corn grew up, the range expanded significantly, and the bird used cattle pastures nearby and over the corn, which was more readily available. So you can see it expanded a lot during the fledging period. And then you can see it shifted pretty much entirely to the pasture. It still overlapped some of the corn, but the majority of the post-fledging range was in cattle pastures. So this is pretty cool. This is what we were really hoping for. This bird had access to several different kinds of fields, and we're able to see how they shift over time. And also we're going to be able to relate this to our measurements of vegetation height and density. Now I'm going to show you the example of the bird that moved the farthest of all the birds we tracked. So this is a pretty exciting one. It's a video. I hope it works. It should be okay. You can see where Madison, Culpeper, Sperryville, and Front Royal are in this map. And the orange dots show nest boxes in our network. The yellow dot in the middle shows the current box, and this video is going to show the movements of this bird. So you can see it made it. So basically, it was hanging out. This is a post-fledging video. It was hanging out near the box, and then it flew almost all the way to Front Royal. Then a few days later, it flew down to Madison and almost over to Culpeper. And then it finally ended up back in its territory. And then it basically spends several more weeks in its territory. So this is after the babies are gone. We don't know exactly what's going through this bird's head. You know, maybe it wasn't that happy with its territory. It wanted to check out some other areas and see if they might be better. It went a long way, which seems like it would have been a lot of work, but maybe for Kestrels, that's no big deal. And then finally it ended up back in its original territory. So again, we're gonna be able to look at this in more detail to find out what might have been motivating this bird and other birds. Okay, but so what can we say in terms of land management based on this first preliminary year of research? Our results indicate, preliminary results indicate that Kestrels require fields with short vegetation and that cattle pastures and horse pastures seems to be ideal habitat. So like I showed in these examples, when cornfields grow too tall or when native grasslands or wildflower meadows grow too tall, Kestrels seem to switch to cattle pastures to find their food. But again, we're going to be analyzing this in more detail. And one thing that really interests me is trying to figure out if we can use cattle or other means of disturbance to manage grasslands so that we can have diverse native grasslands that support plant diversity, pollinators, and grassland birds. And, you know, I think when I first started this line of work, I thought that we would just be able to plant native grasses and flowers, and then that would be fine. We would have really good native plant diversity and the pollinators would come. And then all the grassland birds like kestrels and grasshopper sparrows would come too. But the fact is that they grow tall really fast. And so you obviously don't want to mow them in May or June when the birds are breeding. But you know, maybe cattle grazing is going to be part of the solution here. And I think this is what we're going to be investigating in the coming years. And if anyone out there is trying to graze native meadows that are diverse and not just fescue, we'd definitely be interested in learning, you know, what works and what doesn't from you. And we will be keeping you informed as well of our results. So research in the coming years, I've talked a little bit about this. So we're going to be expanding to adult males. So we're going to tag 20 adult males this year, as well as an additional 20 adult females this year. Hopefully, we're going to tag the same 2 individuals from a pair and be able to see how the males and females move differently in different habitats and throughout the nesting season. I think that's going to be really cool. So stay tuned. We're also going to be tagging fledglings with radio tags. That's like this cute guy here who is obviously not quite ready, but almost ready to leave the nest. And the hope again here is that it seems like nest success is really high in nest boxes in Virginia and also across North America. And so it seems like the fledgling period is a sensitive time, an important time for these birds. And we'd like to understand what kinds of habitats they're using and how they meet their maker. So I think, you know, we're going to find quite a few dead fledglings, unfortunately. We want to understand what's causing trouble for them and also understand which ones are surviving and why. And this is going to be fitting into a much bigger project that Hawk Mountain in Pennsylvania is leading. We're also going to be collecting blood samples this year to test for herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. Like I said, another hypothesis for the decline of this species is toxic chemicals. And we are again working with Hawk Mountain on this to test for a huge range of toxins to see what's present in our birds and across the eastern US to see how that might relate to some of these declines. And finally, in 2023, we aim to quantify prey abundance in these different kinds of fields. So we're going to be probably using track tubes, which is you put a little ink pad and some bait inside of a tube, and then you see how many mice run through it. We'll also probably be doing sweep netting or some other way of quantifying insects in these different habitats, because we're obviously seeing differential use of these different fields by the kestrels, and we'd like to know if it's simply a structural issue or if it's actually a prey abundance issue on top of that as well. And of course, we'd like to learn if there are ways we can enhance the habitat quality for kestrels and other grassland birds. So what can you do to help kestrels? First of all, if you own a property with a big open field, you can install a nest box. And I underline maintain the nest box because we don't want to just be breeding starlings. So you want to make sure, keep an eye, and if starlings are inhabiting your box, you can throw the eggs out. And if they're still undeterred, you can close the entrance because we really don't want to be producing starlings. And if you don't have a big field, you can ask your neighbors if they would be interested in letting you install a kestrel box on their property. We have been very fortunate to work with a huge range of landowners who are really helpful in this. And I think there's not much to object to with a kestrel box that's not going to interfere with grazing or anything. So don't be afraid to ask your neighbors. Mow your fields annually in March. Kestrels and other grassland birds require grasslands, and especially short grasslands. So mowing once a year or burning once a year is required. And you don't want to do this from mid-April to mid-July because that's when grassland birds are breeding in these fields. And like I said, our results are preliminary, but it sure seems like it would be prudent if you have enough acreage to maintain fields of different heights. So taller, diverse meadows for quail and pollinators, and shorter fields for grasshopper sparrows, meadowlarks, and kestrels. And again, we're interested in learning on how this works. If you have examples and lessons, we'd like to hear from you as well. And of course, minimize the use of pesticides. And what kind of boxes do we recommend? So the Coveside Conservation Box is a good one. You can buy that one on Amazon. It's about the right size. If you do buy that one, we recommend that you modify it by adding a rim at the bottom, as shown in the bottom box here, the black arrow that keeps babies and eggs from rolling out. And if you want to build your own box, you can use Art Kingert's design. This is available for download on our website. This is an excellent box design, and it's a little bigger than the Coveside, which is ideal. How to set up a Kestrel box? Basically, you want a 2x4x12 pressure treated board, and that's the main pole for the box. And then you can screw that into a sturdy fence post, and then you can have a 2x6x12, 2x4x6 board that you put perpendicular to that one to stiffen the whole setup. And again, we have instructions on our website about this. Predator guards are important. So this is a black snake that unfortunately got into one of the nest boxes. And you can see some harbor cloth on the box on the right there. So simply attaching a 2x2 foot piece of harbor cloth, 1/2 inch harbor cloth, is a good predator guard. You can enhance the setup like you see in this picture by putting some flashing below the harbor cloth. That makes it harder for snakes to get around. So to summarize the results, the territories for our females were the smallest ever reported for the species. We also found that 4 of our birds established new territories in the area once their chicks fledged. So they're using a lot of different fields in the area. These additional territories, plus the forays, like I showed you with the bird that went to Front Royal and Madison, indicate that fields adjacent to breeding territories serve as important kestrel habitat. And finally, it seems that a significant proportion of kestrels in our area don't migrate south for the winter. So this, fits into what I was talking about in the very beginning. We don't have a lot of data, either from our study or from the Moros. The Moros obviously have a lot more than we do, but it's really hard to get a lot of data on long distance movements of these birds. But it seems like quite a few of them stay here year round, although obviously we have migrants that pass through as well. So I have a huge amount of people to thank for this project. It's a complicated and collaborative project. It actually worked really well thanks to the help of all of you all last year. So we had a lot of wonderful interns, volunteers, and landowners. We are generously funded by the Rains Family Fund, Nick Lapham, VSO, Washington Biologist Field Club, Peregrine Fund, and Janine Mosley. Those are our permits and the photographers. And I'll just leave it there. So thank you very much. And I will look in the chat for questions. That's probably the best way to do it. Maybe I'll start from the beginning because I think some people typed in some stuff in the beginning. What are greenstone woodlands? Yeah, so greenstone is metamorphic basalt. It's in the Catoctin Formation, one of the common geologies around here. And we have some chestnut oak woodlands with widely spaced chestnut oaks with diverse understories here on the Clifton property and also quite a few in the region. And we would just like to study these to understand, first of all, if fire is called for, if thinning is called for. It seems like some of these, quite a few of these plants are kind of on their way out because they prefer partial sun or full sun, and they seem to be getting shaded out. It's also being invaded by bittersweet and other invasives. So we're gonna do some baseline surveys to learn about these woodlands. Okay, next. What constitutes nest success? Yeah, so that's a really good question. So, you know, we unfortunately didn't have someone posted outside of each of these boxes to actually see the babies leave out of every box. You know, the birds that we tagged, we had a closer eye on, but obviously in the 230 box network, we're not doing that. So the threshold, Alan could maybe chime in here. I think it was if they grow to be 12 days or so old, then we considered that to be successful. Is that right, Alan, or is it a bit later?
Yeah, this is Alan. Often people will use survival to banding age, which you can do a variety of times. This time I tend to use 20 days. So 2/3 or 3/4 of the way to fledging age.
There you go. So a lot later, so 20 days, yep. How long do you leave the cameras on the Kestrel? Yeah, I don't, oh, do you mean the transmitter? I mean, yeah, so the transmitters, we're not removing them. They're staying on the birds. And the thing is that we found no change at all in the behavior of these birds. So when we attach the transmitters, they flew no problem and they're still hanging around in the area and they seem to be doing just fine. Did you ban the fledglings? Yes, we banned the babies as well. And that the Moreaus and Alan have learned a lot from that. So by banning a lot of fledglings, we find out how many of them hang around, which is cool. Does a breeding pair stay together longer than one breeding season? I don't think so. Maybe Alan or the Moreaus, I think, who are on here could comment on that. I do not think so. How does preferred land inform characterizing the food they are getting in that land? Well, I think that's what we're going to get at next year when we're able to actually sample the prey in these different habitats. Do the devices test for acoustics? Perhaps aircraft could be causing the Kestrels to change foraging patterns. That's interesting. I think, you know, I don't know about planes, but we have found, so Joe Kolowski and the Moreaus did some analyses and they found that boxes that are they're next to really busy roads tend to be occupied less often than ones that are near quiet roads. So they do seem to react a little bit to really busy traffic, although in general, they're okay, seems like on the roadside. Is a utility company okay with putting nest boxes on power poles? Yeah, so we put them on power poles a lot, actually, in addition to putting them on fence posts. And so far, I haven't had any trouble. Alan has had, I think, only one case where they, you know, wanted to move it. And actually, in another case, the power company replaced the power pole and then put the Kestrel box back on the new power pole. So I think, yeah. So luckily, so far so good. And it is a good place, but you still have to put a predator guard if you put your box on a power. I'm curious about the relationship between territory size and quality and competition for desirable boxes / territories. Yeah, I think that it's definitely a big assumption to say that a small territory means the quality is better. I think we need to look carefully at the location information that we're collecting and also maybe prey abundance eventually to find out if that's true. I'm guessing that it's true. It makes sense that a smaller territory would be higher quality, but we can't say that for sure. Okay. What kind of camera are you using to inspect? Yeah, so it's like it's an endoscope that you can buy on Amazon for like 40 bucks, and it connects to your phone, so you can, put it up on a pole into the box and look at what's happening on your phone. And we should add that to our website too, so that people know what kind of camera. I know Alan is always trying new cameras, and maybe I'll contact you directly about that. Nan, yeah. Nick says, have you all spoken with researchers at the Piedmont Grassland Bird Initiative? They are conducting research on how grasslands affect bird biodiversity on farms in rural areas. Yes, so we are working with them, and I think Justin might be on this call, in fact, from VWL, who's running that. Eric is wondering, can the shine from the GPS unit attract the attention of a Cooper's hawk? Wow, that's an interesting one. I actually have not seen like a bling from the solar panel, so I doubt it, and I hope not. That would be a bummer, but it seems unlikely. What do they eat in the wintertime? Voles. They really like voles, meadow voles. They might get the occasional bluebird or something as well. Okay, well, last call for questions.
I see a hand, Bert. I don't know.
Yeah. Could I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead. Yes.
No, not a question really. You have things that seem very well thought out. Your ideas for the future, I think, are going to uncover many interesting things. And seeing the latest technology being put onto the birds is very exciting, I think. And so good continued success in the future.
Thank you very much. Any problems with windmills? I think I saw a few people from Hog Mountain on this call. They might be able to comment on that. I'm not aware of kestrels hitting windmills, although I'm sure it happens. But around here, no. Are the eBird frequency of sighting bars controlled for numbers reported? I'm not sure I understand that. Maybe you could explain, Sophie?
Yeah, may I speak?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. At the beginning, when you were talking about how often people were citing kestrels and then reporting it in eBird.
Yeah.
Right. And then there were those bars of, I think they were little green bars of information with, they were larger if more were seen. And in January and December, the bars were much larger. And I was wondering if no, never mind. Sorry.
Okay, well, yeah, I think eBird, I think is controlling for the effort, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
I know research exists about orchard owners who promote kestrels to reduce bird damage to crops. Yeah. They eat some birds, but they don't eat a lot of birds, Dr. Jacob. So they really prefer insects and rodents, but they do eat a few birds. So yeah, I think they are a potential control, and similarly, barn owls are used to control rodents in crop areas. Okay, well, it's nearly 8 o'clock, and thank you so much for your interest. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to reporting on our progress this year. And if you're ever interested in managing property for Kestrels or setting up boxes, feel free to send me an email. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bert, for a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bert.
Thank you.